I want to thank you for joining us tonight on our final webinar of Zoom University's Family Week, our Parents Panel. I am joined with our special guests, both Kevin and Gary Lee, who are co-founders of Parents Take Action to End Rape on Campus, also known as PTA EROC. So I will just hand it off to them. But before I do, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to keep your cameras off or on, that's up to you. There will be a portion throughout this segment where we'll be interacting with folks who wish to ask questions directly to Gary and Kevin, and they will prompt you when to do so. Or you can keep your camera off, but just be sure to unmute yourself to ask your question. But I will hand it off to Gary and Kevin to introduce themselves and to give you some insight as to why they're here today and more.
Well, hi. My name's Gary Lee, and I'm happy to be here. We got involved with Parents Take Action to End Rape on Campus as a result of my daughter, my younger daughter, being sexually assaulted during her freshman year at a university here in Dallas. She was a heavily recruited athlete nationally, decided to stay and go to school here in Dallas because she wanted to go into business here in Dallas, ultimately after school. And we were, really, frankly, quite happy about that. She did live on campus with the other athletes and the other student body, and was assaulted by another athlete. So a lot of our preparation, we just kind of didn't see a lot of this stuff coming. We were really unprepared, and she was really unprepared because, athletics was always kind of a closed universe for her. And so we were caught off guard by a myriad of things through all of this, and have learned an immense amount about the university life, about her, about trauma. She's been through a PTSD program, which was designed for military people. She was one of the first civilians involved in it. Very successful for her, inpatient deal in Utah. So we can talk about some PTSD aspects of this. Both Kevin and my daughter still have service dogs. So, and they're service dogs. They're not companion or emotional support. They're there for the PTSD aspect for my daughter. So it's, every day's a new adventure. Every day's, how's Savannah? As she walks in the door, which Savannah do we get? And it's been important, I think, through this journey for my wife and for I to be able to share a lot of what we've learned about all of the above with other parents as they go through this. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Gary. I'm Kevin Marr. I live near Dallas. Gary lives in Dallas. I live in Plano, which is suburbia, Dallas. I am the father of 3 daughters, married. My middle daughter, Melissa, was sexually assaulted her freshman year in college. This happened out of state, so large state university, but not in Texas. So there was some separation there when that happened. We went through a number of different aspects of the Title IX set of issues. She filed a criminal complaint against the individual. She filed a school complaint against the individual. We did file a Title IX complaint with the Department of Education. We ended up suing, the individual ended up suing the university. So a number of different, as Melissa says, we've checked a number of boxes in this go. So that's my story, and that's how Gary and I met, and that's how I got into this issue from direct personal experience.
Mm-hmm. And with regard to End Rape on Campus, like how did you learn about End Rape on Campus? How did that start for you?
Well, I can answer that one. I think I introduced Gary, but I'm not 100% sure. But back when Annie Clark was involved. We were kind of at the end of our rope. We had been involved in school issues for about 4 or 5 months. And we were like, what next? You know, they were throwing a lot of things at us. A lot of things were going on. Didn't know what to do. And we looked out on the internet and found NRAPE on Campus. And my wife sent an email, and we got a call from Annie Clark. She pointed us in a lot of directions really fast. It was great. So that's how I get involved with EROC. And this PTA EROC is kind of I'll call it a pay it back scheme, right? In the sense that we began, I talked with Annie, and I would get a phone call or an email from Annie, and she would say, hey, I've got this parent, can you talk to them? And it kind of took at least some of the burden. You know, they were involved in direct, survivors, and we could take some of the burden off of them. 3 years ago now, I guess, we formalized that into an organization, called it Parents Take Action to End Rape on Campus. So that's how we got involved. We are, I think I said in the other sessions, we were inspired by EROC. You know, that little story gives you the whole inspiration story, but we are independent of EROC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll throw in 2 cents on that. All of us as a parent organization, a parent group, were sort of collected by one of our counselors here in Dallas. Actually, I guess she's in Plano. But kind of through Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center. And I think the reason that our group of parents were asked to join the group is because I think that the counselor knew that group would not stop short of creating an avenue for change. Mm-hmm. And PTA EROC sort of came from that group as we weren't going to stop until we got something done. Mm-hmm. And coincidentally with that, a couple of other people here on the meeting tonight on both coasts have been a part of helping us organize that. So it's been a good group.
So explain to folks who are on the call about PTA EROC in regard to parents who connect with you and are looking for support services or, you know, some advice. Like, what do you typically receive from parents? What types of questions do you get?
So typically we deal with email or phone calls. You know, it's one-on-one kind of discussions. You know, our mission is to do what I would call individual outreach with parent or parents. We have done some things recently, like in the last week is really the first time we've gone in I'll say a big way and done some group outreach things. But typically our interaction is direct with 1 or 2 parents. And what we're doing is trying to basically shorten the learning curve for them. So we're sharing our experiences, what we've learned, what to watch out for. I would also say that what we're not is counselors or attorneys, so we don't give legal advice, we don't counsel, but we certainly can share our experience and say, you know, we went through this criminal trial, and this is what happened, or this is what our experience was. Or we filed a Title IX complaint, and this is what our experience was, and that sort of thing.
Many of the different parents in the group, Kenyora, have very different experiences. So depending on, you know, what that parent's running into with their child, we can kind of steer them toward whoever in the group has the best background on that.
Absolutely. So with that said, for some of you who may not know, or for those who are just joining us today and registered today, throughout this series, we've been asking folks to send in their questions to both Gary Lee and Kevin. And so I'm now going to start asking questions that have been provided by some parents. So one particular question that came up is what to do when the school does not want to listen or try to intimidate you. What have you done?
Gary, you want to go?
Well, so our experience with Savannah was the Title IX coordinator at the university wanted nothing to do with this, absolutely nothing. The coaches didn't want anything to do with it. Her scholarship was threatened. She had to spend all 4 years in proximity to her rapist, working out of the same facilities, in some cases attending the same classes.
Mm.
Savannah basically put her head down and was just going to gut it out and didn't want to go through the whole process, the whole throwdown and everything that came with that.
Mm.
And as we spoke the other night, the first night, as Kevin spoke eloquently about, we have to let them drive. She has to make those decisions. So our experience with the university couldn't be worse. And it turns out they, within a year of her assault, there was a Title IX settlement with that university and the government over what the go forward for that school was going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
They theoretically made some changes. I don't think they were particularly effective. And I don't think they did it for the right reasons. And I think when it came to, one of the questions we get a lot about Title IX and the university is, I think they forget who their customer is.
Mm.
Are they there for the student or are they there for athletics or are they there? You know what I mean? It's like they get lost in what it is they're there for. And that's why I think some of the people with us tonight are, on the advocacy side of things, to advocate for those students. The Title IX person should be doing that, should be helping walk them through the system. That was not our experience. And so we had to coalesce to Savannah's vision of what that looked like while she made her way through university.
Absolutely.
So I have 4 words to answer this question: be relentless and be resilient, right? So you don't take no for an answer. You keep asking. If that person doesn't get you an answer, you keep working your way up to the, up the chain. You need to be resilient because they're going to try to ignore you. They're going to wish you away. You need to basically don't take no for an answer. In the end, you only go so far. We were able to do certain things. There were other things I wish we had been able to do, but we weren't. But it took, and I'll preface this too, I should say that my daughter at the time wasn't really in any shape to do this, and she outsourced, if you will, to me. She decided, yes, I want to press charges, or yes, I wanted to do this, and then I was the one that was executing. So it was, it takes work, and it takes, it wears you out. So you have to not let it wear you out and just keep holding them accountable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one other question that came to us is also, what are the benefits of students telling their parents about sexual assault? And also, is it ever okay to help children tell their parents about a sexual assault when, and, about the experience itself?
I'll answer that as a parent. As a parent, I sure would like to know. Going back to the point Gary made a moment ago, you need to let them drive, right? So the survivor needs to take control. And taking control may mean I don't want to tell my parents, or I want to handle this myself, or whatever, whatever their decision is. As a parent, yeah, I wanted to know. My daughter told us right away. One of her friends or roommates advised her to do that, and she did. So we were fortunate, but it doesn't always work that way. Mm-hmm. As a counselor, part of this I think is a counselor question, right? That I'm not sure what the right answer is. I'm not sure they should necessarily encourage. We're not trained in those sort of things. In my experience, my daughter told my wife and I was glad that she did. And then she allowed us, once she made some basic decisions, to kind of take over for her.
I will tell you
And
from
I
some.
might interject.
Yeah. Hi, Julie.
Kevin, hi. You helped me tremendously because they were trying to bully me and my daughter was incapable. She couldn't get out of bed and stayed in her dorm room and shut down and wanted me to take over. And they were trying to bully me out of it. They didn't want me involved. And Kevin, you really helped me because you had been through a similar situation, and you have to be assertive and tell them my daughter has authorized me. I'm her voice. She doesn't have a voice right now, and you have a right to do that. And there are some universities that do not want you involved and will try very aggressively to get you out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Savannah didn't tell us for months because she didn't know. She was so traumatized that it was blocked out. Mm-hmm. And it was like a delayed recall. And it was actually in a Title IX conference setting at the university required of athletes when they were explaining, what sexual assault looks like, this and that. And all of a sudden she's like, oh my God, that's exactly what happened to me. And she just fell apart. Since months had gone by really before she understood all that had happened, and it still comes back, bits and pieces are still falling into place. We didn't know about it immediately. She was comfortable telling us because she knew we wouldn't kill them immediately. Mm-hmm. But she was concerned about what our reactions would be. And then, Julie, to speak to your point, I think she was very happy that we could pick up when she wanted us to. Mm-hmm. Pick up the ball and run with it in certain directions that she just couldn't. And she was worried about her scholarship. She was worried about this, worried about that. And one of the things I wanted to mention too is that in this time when she didn't really realize what had happened, and we certainly didn't know what had happened, she would come to us periodically and say, hey, I want to transfer to the University of Miami. And we're like, honey, we jumped through all these, you jumped through all these. I mean, you've done all this work to get where you are. And she couldn't put her finger on it, but she just really wanted, like hell, to transfer out of that school and go to Miami. And now we know. I mean, it took months and months and months for us to realize why she so desperately wanted to get out of that environment. Was because she had been assaulted, and because every day she had to see, that person. So.
I should point out that Julie Ritter, who spoke a few moments ago, Julie is one of our other board members of PTA Iraq. So thanks for timing in there, Julie.
I'm sorry, I jumped in. I don't know the rules.
There aren't any rules.
Okay.
No, I have a few questions that folks have entered in, but we're also asking folks to jump in and ask questions themselves too, if they wish. So you did perfect. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the school side, right? So both of your daughters informed you of what's happening. You went through this process, and you had to jump through these loopholes. And had to go through from one person to the next and deal with delays and deal with just trying to figure out and find out all this information. For some folks on this call, there are some parents, and then we also have some folks who are in advocacy organizations and folks who are campus administrators on this call as well. And one of the questions we had is, how can, as a campus administrator, support parents who have children who've gone through this process? I think even aside from just the process itself, but providing that emotional support. Have you seen that when you were going through your processes? And if not, what would you suggest to campus administrators in terms of having empathy and recognizing the sensitivities around this?
Well, I'll speak to that real quick. There were a couple of professors that got it. And one of our frustrations were, I mean, you know, it's a fairly small school, it's a private university. When you see a kid who was heavily recruited and has got a high GPA, high scores to come in, and all of a sudden they drive off a cliff, as a professor, you should know something's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing the odds of what it's going to be, you know, 25, 30% should tell you that you need to reach out to that student, or, you know, offer them an avenue toward counseling or something like that. But it should be pretty apparent. And what really pissed me off is that didn't happen, but with a couple of professors. And they didn't really do it overtly, I think, because they might have feared some repercussion from the school. The university certainly could have been much more empathetic, much more helpful. The faculty, everybody involved in that whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I was disappointed because it's obvious. I think it should be obvious when that happens. Sorry.
Yeah, my experience, I wasn't necessarily, well, one or two meetings in, and it was pretty clear that I shouldn't look for any support or empathy from the people at the university. So, you know, to answer the question, what can they do? Well, be empathetic, be open and honest. Don't blow sunshine. You know, there's probably a dozen other platitudes I can throw out there, but basically that's what it is. I realize now, and I didn't quite realize at the end, someone is introduced to me as a counselor or somebody who could solve problems. He said he had a magic wand he could wave and make things happen. Well, like I said, it took about 2 days to figure out he was full of it. But, you know, show some empathy, be honest. You're not helping by clouding the issue and not giving the truth. I'm not going to rely on the school. I would caution anyone to rely on the school for any kind of emotional support or any of that kind of thing. You know, in my experience, those administrators are there to protect the school, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I see a question from Kim that just came in. Does your group have any outreach to faculty and alumni advisors, as well as to national organizations about prevention of sexual assault? Like, I think aside from us and No You're Not, but speak to that.
So the answer is no, we don't. And because we've been focused more on that individual outreach rather than, you know, to groups and going to the professors and all that. That's something as we expand that we want to do. We want to be able to touch with, you know, organizations, whether it be professors or, you know, advocates or administrators, if they would, you know, wanted to talk to us. We could talk for a long time about the question we just answered, right, about the things we think they should do and the way they should behave. But at the moment, we're a small, teeny tiny little organization, and we're, you know, beginning to branch out. So at the moment, we're small, and we aren't that involved with organizations. We're more involved with individual parents.
When we launched a couple of years ago at the National Sexual Assault Conference, which happened to be here in Dallas, there were a couple of universities that were extremely interested in including our information in their orientation packets, because it checked boxes for the university that helped them, you know, on the keeping in touch with parents side. And I think that's a good way to look at it for schools using a parents group like this. It's another resource for parents that you hope no one will ever need, but we know.
I would caution administrators or anybody involved in that you know, profession, don't ask the question that you don't want to hear the answer to, would be my advice, right? Because we've got plenty to say, although it's not necessarily going to be all sunshine roses in support of school administrators.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to talk about fraternities, because Kim, I saw in your comment that your daughter's incident happened at a fraternity, and so did mine. And fraternities are required to have an individual in charge of education, and including sexual assault prevention. on a national level. And when incidents happen, they get sanctions where they had to have increased training. But I felt like I was going against a brick wall because I researched and found out that it is a big SEC school where my daughter was assaulted. The dues were going to lobby on Capitol Hill for pro-fraternity bills to protect them from sexual assault. So here they're doing training, they're required to all the members at individual fraternities, but yet they're taking their dues to lobby on Capitol Hill to protect them. So that was very disturbing to find out.
And I also want to point out too, for those who may not be as familiar with the Title IX before the newly proposed ones that were just released last week, when it comes to off campus, any sexual assault that occurs off campus, typically what we've seen is that in terms of the fraternity and sorority houses, or events that took place at fraternity or sorority sponsored events, they were essentially not included under the Title IX regulations because they weren't recognized necessarily as being seen as an educational program or activity at that point. Now what we're seeing, one of the wins, I will say, in terms of the newly released Title IX regulations is that now the fraternity and sorority that are actually recognized by the schools as specific entities, if they were to host events, whether it's, sponsored by fraternity X or sorority X, it's now considered an educational program and activity. And so if a sexual assault occurs during any of their sponsored events, essentially they would violate Title IX and would have to be held accountable underneath this new provision. And so we're probably going to see a significant shift and change in that than ever before, because now fraternities and sororities are now underneath the rule as having been recognized as such. And that, again, I want to reiterate, it's only for fraternities and sororities that have been recognized by the school. So there can be other fraternities and sororities that folks may be a part of, but not necessarily the school has recognized them as such. So I want you to understand that. Another question, in terms of, let's see, we have a lot of questions here, and I'm happy to, I think we also had a question here too, from Casey. Were there any kind of resources or support that you can think of that would have been helpful during the filing process in reference to Title IX?
Kevin, that's what you got from EROC, really, right?
I mean, if you mean by filing Title IX, a title, official Title IX complaint, it's exactly right. What the help we got from NRAPE on campus was exactly that. I got advice on filing a complaint, the format of the complaint, the fact that I didn't need an attorney to do that. I could write it myself and so forth. So that was what, exactly where that came from was Annie and EROC. And that is some of what, we would hope to be able to, that's the kind of thing we'd be able to do. Hey, if you think there's an issue, this is something you can do. This is something I did. Here's a broad, template of what you could fill out, and here's how the process works, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm reading through the chat here. I see someone who says that they're in need of a Title IX lawyer, and any suggestions would be helpful. Gary Lee or Kevin, do you have any suggestions? I have suggestions as well, but would love for you to speak on that if that's something that you.
There are several legal organizations in the state of Texas. I'm sure every state has them as well, that are there to provide free legal support for certainly the victim, if not the survivor's family, and kind of help everybody through that process. I think that would be my first stop. And through the Rape Crisis Center, they probably have a referral or two as well.
And Kenora probably has some names. My point on attorneys would be, you need to know going in what it is you want that attorney to do.
Right.
What is it that it's like buying a car, right? Are you trying to transport people? Are you looking for a hot sports car? What do you want this car to do? What do you want this attorney to do? Do you want representation in the hearing process? Do you want to sue the individual? Do you want to sue the school? So you need to be able to answer that question and realize it may take more than one attorney to satisfy all the needs that you might have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If it's a civil suit, there is a big difference. And there are some big shot lawyers in the United States that have been successful. It's really difficult to take on a university or a fraternity, and they have to play games to be successful. But there are some in the United States that are nationally known for civil.
Absolutely. I would also say there are two organizations that we work very closely with that are able to provide folks with either volunteer attorneys or at least provide you up to three attorneys in your area. And I'll write this all in the chat box and even in our follow-up emails. But the organization names are called Equal Rights Advocates. And it's through their Enough program where they, yes, and Title IX also has resources too, but Equal Rights Advocates has an Enough program where they have volunteer attorneys that will help students walk through their Title IX case. And that's something where you would have to do is like fill out an inquiry form, and they'll get back to you with like, okay, here's how we can help you. The Natural Women's Law Center ended up with Time's Up to create what they've called a legal network. Within that legal network, it's kind of very similar to an inquiry form that you'd fill out, and someone would reach back out to you to provide you with up to 3 attorneys in your specific area that could either help you pro bono or at a very reduced rate. Just depends on folks' specific provisions. But those are 2 specific organizations that we refer folks to who are looking to take either legal action or just looking for a legal assistance, just to help them just understand Title IX overall and what their potential solutions they can take or potential actions they could take, whether it's against the school or whether it is, moving forward with, whether it's just against the assailant or moving forward with filing a report with the Office of Civil Rights for a complaint. Susan asks, what are you looking for an attorney to do? A civil suit? Or I'm not sure, Susan, if you were asking Kim.
That's exactly what we were talking about. And Kevin, you want to talk about swim lanes for a minute? I think that makes it.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I think it's, as I talked about a moment ago, and Susan was given the same answer. What do you want this attorney to do? The swim lanes, if anybody within the Monday session talked about the different aspects of Title IX, whether it's working with the school and academic issues, whether it's filing a complaint against the individual for violation of the school code of conduct, the criminal process, whether it's fraternities and sororities involved, athletics are involved, right? They're all different issues. They each have their own, their own issues and problems. But again, what of those things do you want an attorney to do? I can talk a little bit about what we initially did. Initially, I wanted an attorney to represent us in the school adjudication process, right? The school that my daughter went to had a very formal process, much like we'll probably see people follow now because of the Title IX changes. There was an investigation followed by pre-hearing motions that lasted about 5 months. A hearing itself lasted only 2 days, but we wanted a lawyer. The perpetrator had a lawyer. didn't want to go into that situation unarmed, so to speak. And we had a lawyer who basically dealt with, all those issues. There were motions and court filings and all kinds of things. And then it gave us a little more credibility, I think, with the school when we said, hey, we want some help with tuition refund or this or that or whatever academic issues. They're getting a letter now from a lawyer, not just Kevin calling up and harassing them, which turns out wasn't very effective. So that was one reason to have a lawyer. Eventually, we did file some lawsuits. We went to a small local firm, same firm, but a different lawyer who handled the lawsuits, right? Civil side. Basically, the first guy was a criminal defense attorney, right? And he was representing our daughter in this whole process. And then there was another guy at the same firm who basically was the civil guy, the torts guy, the lawsuit guy.
Looking at more questions while also looking at the chat box here. In terms of healing, and for everyone, the healing process and healing journey looks a little different, especially if they're currently still going through a Title IX investigation or one has essentially concluded. But I would love for you to talk about just what that journey has looked like for yourselves as parents and for your daughters. And again, understanding that this is an everlasting journey. They're going to forever be, finding ways to heal and to cope. Can you speak to what are some of the, I guess, I don't want to call it strategies, but some of the things that you've done to help your daughters deal with what has happened with them? I know, Gary Lee, you spoke a little bit about service dogs, but other methods that you've engaged with to...
I'd say that I think the thing that had the greatest impact on myself and possibly Jeannie, my wife, was going through the advocate training at Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center, because we did not have any idea, how little we knew, how non-trauma informed we were as parents. I think every parent likes to believe they're plugged into their kid's life and that, we have an idea of what's going on. That universe is one that never occurred to me. So becoming just trauma informed, becoming aware of, I had no idea the percentages were so high for college students to be assaulted. No idea. And then, through the training, you learn that in life, the numbers are crazy, not just in universities, but just in life. And it was like, again, that's just a universe that I wasn't a part of, that I knew. So I think becoming articulate about it, we talked about going through the training with our Facebook friends and our friends in general, and all of a sudden, people come out of the woodwork and say, oh my God, well, I was assaulted here or there or at work, and once again, I've known people for, my whole life and had absolutely no idea. And it's gratifying in a way now to know that we can help each other. We can be emotionally supportive of something that we didn't even know we had in common. So I would say the advocacy training, and however deep you want to go in that or whatever, was extremely powerful for us. So.
I think that in my experience, and this is just my experience, good counselors were helpful. Counselors for us, meaning the parents, my wife and I, also counselors for my daughter. But it's a long process. The recovery, the healing, it is not linear. It is going sideways for a while. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. You don't know what the triggers are going to be. Gary mentioned earlier, Savannah's walking in the door, which, what issue are we going to get today? And it could vary just on any number of things. So it's slow, it's not linear. You know, I found myself getting a little frustrated sometimes. So you need to be patient, more patient than you ever thought you could be. I would say there were a couple milestones for my daughter that were important. One, realizing that there are other people out there that's happened to and being put in touch with some of them. That was one. Getting a service dog was another. The kid who assaulted her was eventually, 15 months later, convicted, if you want to call it that, of a violation of the student code of conduct. So there's a certain amount of vindication with that. So those are three important milestones that led to, you know, increased healing for her or whatever. You know, now we're 6 years on. It still comes up every here and there. It's not as frequent. Obviously, in the beginning, it was 20 hours a day. This was an issue. So time will heal it, you know, to some degree.
And as we've come into this new, you know, COVID pandemic, and you know, particularly with students who are either currently, you know, still engaged in Title IX processes, are now still trying to figure out how the new Title IX regulation is going to apply to their current cases. Students who not only dealing with that, but also coupled with any issues that they may be dealing with at home, you know, trying to find alternative shelter for some students who may not have been able to go back home, students who haven't had the accommodations that they once would have had if they were on campus, now have lost those accommodations. We have one parent whose daughter is currently going off to high school. Is currently a high school senior. She's going off to college next year. And, you know, she's been very open about her sexual assault experience and going through her own healing process. But she's worried that with the quarantine happening, her daughter's becoming more drawn out, and that she's, you know, finding deep comfort in safety in physical isolation. And literally, like she says, she's literally untouchable and is not able to practice much needed coping skills to reintegrate into that like co-ed life. Have you seen or have you spoken to other parents who are feeling worried about how this COVID pandemic has affected their children who have been sexually assaulted, maybe regressed or relapsed back into just, you know, whatever that comfort zone is for them, whatever, you know, if they're feeling any type of re-triggering that's happening because of just the pandemic, and not having those accommodations at the ready.
There's a lot to unpack in that question. So let's just talk about COVID-19. I don't have any experience. It's too new, right, in the sense of dealing with parents. But you can look, you know, to yourselves, right? You know, my wife and I now are independent of our kids, or they're independent of us, however you want to look at it. And it's, you know, it's turmoil in our house, right? Because we're staying at home and eating either ground beef or chicken every night. You know, it's kind of boring. So, you know, that's the funny part of it. But the reality is, and based on some of the things that were in that question, you know, it sounds like a counselor question, right? Talk to a counselor about some of that. It sounds like this, I think daughter we were talking about, it sounded like when you talk about not touching, that sounds like something that's fairly recent that happened. I went through that, but it was very early on in the process. My daughter, all of my daughters, basically when everybody went to bed, they would come in and say goodnight, give us a kiss goodnight. I mean, they did this, you know, from the time they were small children until they left the house. My daughter stopped doing that. Initially, the touch was a fingertip to a fingertip, and that.
Okay, good. Take your time.
That went on for weeks. And, you know, gradually we got to the point where we got back to where we needed to be.
Mhm.
So it sounds like something that's early. You know, the COVID, I suppose, could be kind of a refuge and perhaps a curse.
Mhm.
But there is a good deal of turmoil. Nobody knows what's going to happen. A lot of schools we don't even know whether they're going to have, you know, in-person classes yet. Some of them have said no. Some of them have said yes.
Mhm.
Um, so it's kind of like if they're dealing with a counselor, and it sounds like this person is, that's a strong conversation to have with a counselor. Or maybe mom and dad can talk to a counselor. When my daughter was getting counseling, to the extent that she could, I mean, again, my daughter authorized us to talk to her or whatever, but to the extent that she could, we had conversations with the counselor about, you know, what was going on with the daughter. And I asked specifically about some things that were going on at home and how could we improve that, and those kinds of things. So if you got a counselor, don't be afraid to use them.
Well, and I think the teledoc kind of thing, um, Savannah has her own counselor who's very good, and thank God they found each other not long ago, and it's making a huge impact for her. They're doing it by Skype, Zoom, whatever now. My counselor and I have been doing it to like teledoc kind of thing now for years. Um, Jeannie has stayed in person with her counselor, and so this is weird for Jeannie, where it's like you know how do you unleash your inner being on your counselor, and you're doing it like this? You know, it's like it's hard. So I think that aspect is difficult for everybody, but I think for Savannah and myself, it's actually been good because we've been able to continue in a comfortable counseling setting with all that going on. I will say that Savannah had done a really good job of turning off the news, uh, unplugging from everything, not hearing all the Trump, you know, sexist stuff, and um, just, you know, Me Too and all that. And now you've got to stay kind of plugged in a little bit on what's going on rule wise and such. And I think that's current affairs are problematic for her, traumatizing to a degree. So there's that kind of fine, what, you know, how connected can you be? How connected do you have to be? Um, so it's a hard thing right now.
And I want to acknowledge both of you for one, just being in this space with me and with everyone else on this call, and sharing your personal experience and your insight. Because I can only imagine. I'm not a parent yet, but I know that dealing with this has been hard and it's been tough. And uh, you know, want you to know that I see you, and I thank you for what you have done so far, of, you know, being resilient yourselves and coming together to build PTA. And so I'm happy to have gotten to know Gary over Gary Lee now today, and Kevin over the past few weeks, and now Julie. But just want to make sure that I want to recognize you all for just your courage to stand up for your children. What I've seen in this movement is that there aren't a lot of parents who do that. And most of it is because they don't know where to go. There are no resources for them to have. And so I know I'm thankful for you all to be here, where we can now say there is a resource. We know that there's a resource. Here's where you can go. But just to also be mindful of time. We have 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that if there's anyone else on these, anyone who wants to ask a question of Kevin, Gary Lee, and maybe Julie, please feel free. And if not, I mean, one of my final questions I have is really, you know, I mean, I think everything you're giving here is advice to parents. Um, but maybe, you know, what does hope look like for you? And what type of piece of advice can you give to parents in terms of holding on and continuing on? What parting words of wisdom can you share?
Wow. Savannah is experiencing some success in business now. And it's had a very positive impact on her personality as a whole. And she spends less time getting caught up in the quagmire of what might have been, and dreams shattered, all those hopes that we all had. But her experiencing some professional success has really has taken a lot of this off the front burner for her and allowed to experience some joy. So that's a biggie.
Awesome.
Julie, did you have anything?
Well, I was just going to say there were some dark days. My daughter actually was in an inpatient psychiatric residential treatment center for over 2 weeks because she shut down, and I just thought, it's over. My daughter's gone, and she's back, and she's a sweet, personable, lovely personality that I adore, and she's forever changed, but things get better. And I just say, hang in there and be there for them, and it gets better.
Absolutely.
I would say, learn everything you can. Talk to counselors, listen to what they say. Took me a while to figure that out, I can assure you. The biggest thing, well, maybe not the biggest thing, but a key thing is, I think the question to do with how do you know it's healing, or how does it change? I can't remember the exact wording of the question, but one of the things that it took me a while to figure out is you need to redefine justice, right? So I get in there, I'm yelling about, we're going to nail this guy to the wall and da 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 da, and guess what? That doesn't happen. I had to get to a place where I understood that wasn't going to happen, and then my daughter had to get to a place, or my wife had to get to a place where that wasn't going to happen. So you need to redefine a little bit what your definition of justice is. If you hold on too tightly, I think, my personal experience, hold on too tightly to, we're going to nail this guy to the wall and da 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 da. You're just going to continue to be disappointed. So it was better for my peace of mind to redefine it a little bit, or rather than to keep holding on to this, TV version of justice or whatever.
I want to thank all three of you for definitely sharing your experiences, and as I believe Casey said, being vulnerable. I know that for me, I am not a survivor, but I am a daughter of a survivor. I'm the niece of a survivor, and I'm a granddaughter of a survivor. And when I do this work, I think back, like, who could have been there for my mom, for my aunt, and my grandmother had they had this information, had they known this information. And so, I just thank you all for your time, your energy you're putting into this, and just the love. Like I can feel the passion that you have behind this, and the perseverance as well. And so I want to thank you again for just sharing your experiences with everyone on this call, and fighting that good fight, especially on behalf of other parents out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot more work to be done, but I'm happy that you're here to do so. If there's anything else you want to say before we conclude,
Thanks, Kenny, for your kind words, and I would like to thank everyone who took an hour out of their evening to listen to us. Hopefully, it was useful to you and whatever. I would also say, before we depart, maybe put that slide up. We've got a website, ptaerock.org, and a phone number, which is 877-PTA-EROCK, I think. And there it is. So crass commercial there, but if you want to talk more, if you want to ask more questions, give us a call. You can go to the website and send us an email. You can call that number. It'll ring through to me if I'm busy. You can leave a message, and then we'll call you back. In 24 hours is our goal, and I think we achieved that for the most part. So, Gary, Julie.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and I'm with Kevin. I just hope that none of us had resources when this happened to us, and the local rape crisis center does a tremendous job of helping with the survivors, and they were really good at helping us find a counseling and a group to join that made a big impact on us. So we're just making a lot bigger group, and hopefully can share that impact. So thank you.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to everyone. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Please continue to stay safe, be well, be healthy, wash your hands, follow the CDC, not what we're hearing from folks. Yeah, see you on the virtual side of everything.